Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome here to the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. My name is Arnold Hill, and I'll be taking you through events here this evening. I just want to, first of all, tell you a little bit about the lecture series that we're here. RCSI MyHealth is an educational venture that we, the college, want to do to provide information to the public on various topics. And this is the first of our series this semester, and we're very grateful for the support that you've all given, especially on a rainy night like tonight, beating Dublin traffic and getting here. I even managed to be on time myself, which is quite shocking. So you're very welcome. Go to the next slide. I just want to tell you a little bit about our speakers tonight. I'm going to be the first speaker, talk about 15 minutes or so. Our second speaker is Mr. Barry O'Sullivan from Beaumont Hospital in RCSI. He's a consultant plastic surgeon, and he's going to talk about new reconstructive techniques in breast cancer. You can give him a round of applause. And our next speaker is Dr. Orla McCardle. She's a consultant radiation oncologist working with us in RCSI and in Beaumont Hospital, and she's going to talk to you about radiation therapy and the newer things that are happening in that field, and with some very exciting information in that topic. So again, a round of applause for Orla. And the last, but by no means least, the most special speaker tonight is Barbara Riley-Hyland. Barbara is now a friend. She's a breast cancer survivor who I can guarantee you will entertain you and make the rest of us look completely boring. She's a brilliant speaker. She's been helping in her role as a survivor over the last 11 years now, so she's done a wonderful job, and she has spent ages preparing her talk. She already sat down beside her, and the young man beside her just said, "That looks like a last-minute job, but it's not. Wait till you hear Barbara." So she told me she doesn't do slides, and we completely accept that, but she's a great, entertaining speaker, and I'm really looking forward to it. So let's start off, just give a few facts about the place you're in. This is RCSI. It was granted a royal charter. That's why we kept the name royal in this day and age, by one of the kings many, many years ago. He subsequently died of syphilis, which is sort of where you get, so we're not really sure, but he did give us the royal charter. We now have a medical school here. We also have a pharmacy school and a physiotherapy school, and we're also responsible for the standards in surgery throughout Ireland. So RCSI has a brief in that Barry and myself are surgeons, and the standards that we practice too are all regulated by the college. So it's the regulatory body that looks after the standards, the conduct of postgraduate exams in surgery, and that's its mission, to ensure that there's safe surgery practiced throughout the country. It's also Ireland's largest medical school, and it's independent. It does receive government funding. We've 84 Irish students in each year, and we've about 200 non-Irish students in each year, making us the largest medical school. We also have ventures overseas in the Middle East and in Malaysia, which just means that my air miles occasionally increase, having to go and examine those parts of the world. But it's very much an international organisation based in Dublin, but a complete focus on healthcare. But probably its most prominent role is in research in healthcare, and it's a huge budget that's spent each year and invested back into the field of research, and you're going to hear some of the outcomes from that tonight. So we have 4 overseas campuses. We have 22,000 alumni, which means it's great if you're a student here. It means you can just pick anywhere in the world and say, I'd like to go and do an elective there. Many of them pick nice places like Hawaii and Australia. I'm yet waiting for that invite to Hawaii, but it'll come someday. We've had a student about 2 years ago who I was so nice to before I graduated. I was trying not to be biased, but I'm still waiting for the invitation. It's okay, I got a phone call to Glasgow once, or Aberdeen. It's just the same. Okay, so annual contribution, this is just some financial money, 119 million to Irish exports, just under 1,000 staff, and 74 societies, so very vibrant. Probably the most exciting thing, when you were walking in through the rain and you had your head buried and didn't want to look up, when you're going out, look straight ahead. There's the most amazing building happening. It's 10 stories, 4 underground, 6 above ground, of probably the latest training facility for medical students and surgeons. The Bottom 2 floors, believe it or not, are a gym. Separate ladies' gym as well for those. I got a tour around the other day, and they've 3 different gyms for the guys. There's kind of like for the little babies, where the weights are really, really small. Then there's just the plodders in the middle, and then there's the body beautiful people who just lift the heavy gyms. And it's just incredible, 3 separate gyms. Barry, we can get membership into the first one. Okay, and then there's a serious stuff. You walk in and there's a really nice environment where there's 3 floors of a library. So it's probably going to be one of the largest libraries, certainly in the city centre area. And then there are 2 amazing floors that help doctors and surgeons train in their clinical skills. So there's a huge infrastructure. It's probably the most electronically advanced building. Everywhere you walk is monitored. But there's a wonderful architect who's done a really superb job in bringing the light into the building. And then on the top floor, there's a simulated surgical training environment. So it's going to be a really exciting showpiece for many, many visitors to come and see. But more important for our students, I think it's going to be a really exciting facility. So next slide, please. And this is just telling you a little bit about it in print on the next slide. Okay, I want to start with some general facts, just to update you on things we know about breast cancer. About 2,300 women and 25 men, don't forget the men, get breast cancer each year in Ireland. And that figure has been fairly static over the last number of years. It will increase when the population increases, but we think the incidence of breast cancer has been about the same, which is quite important. Each year, about 700 women die from breast cancer, which means, you know, we're making progress in that people are living longer with breast cancer, but we still have not beaten this disease by any means. But we're going to share with you some of the improvements and specific things that have happened in this disease. I myself am in practice 17 years in breast cancer treatment, and there's no question that we have really moved on in the treatments available, how we diagnose it, and probably the most significant thing that happened, I'd say, in the first 7 years of my practice. Well, first of all, I got a job in this country actually because they brought in the National Breast Screening Programme. I spent my life as a trainee going through wondering, would there be any investment in new jobs for surgeons? And in fact, the first investment that came was in the National Breast Screening Programme, and that created an extra job, and I was delighted. I could apply from America, and I got a job. So if anyone says screening is a bad thing, I disagree. It got me a job, and that was wonderful. So I spent the first 7 years of my career working in St. Vincent's, and there were really, I think the screening programme provided, first of all, it came with money, which is rare from the government, but it provided a very good level of organisation. So it was and is a super service. Every mammogram got read by 2 radiologists. You were seen by a surgeon. There was no wait times for your surgery. And the problem we had at that time, the first 7 years, was that the symptomatic service I thought was terrible. Big long queues at breast clinics, no control on access. People didn't get timely access. And in fact, it was the Rebecca O'Malley story that people will remember, where there was a case of a misdiagnosis, and I was involved in many of the reviews and advising the government on that. But one great spin-off of that tragedy and series of events was that the government decided to invest in the symptomatic service and make it equal to the screening service. So now the symptomatic breast service and the screening service, I think, are well resourced. And in fact, because it's well resourced and a good part of our health service, you never hear about it because it actually works well. If you're referred by your GP and you've got an urgent lump to be seen, you will be seen within 2 weeks, and you will get, I think, excellent standards of care. And I say that for all 8 centres. I work in Beaumont myself, along with Barry and Orla, but I know that the standards that we've put in from the events of about 10 years ago, there are really strict standards in what you have to adhere to. So I think we've got a really good service. People are seen in a timely fashion, they're diagnosed, and they're treated to the appropriate international standards. It's something we can be really proud of in this country. So I think that's been a significant change for us. The statistics are about 1 in 10 women do get breast cancer, and that's still a great difficulty. If any of you think back to your secondary education and think into your classroom, be it there were 30, if you're in a girls' school, 30 girls in a class, 3 out of 10, 3 out of the 30 will get breast cancer. And that's something that we haven't been able to diminish. We know more about breast cancer, but we still don't understand why people get it. So the risk factors for getting breast cancer, the two most important ones are ones that we cannot control. We increase in age. The older you get, the more likely you are to get breast cancer. That's a statistical fact. And also, if you have an inherited predisposition to get breast cancer, that's a significant risk factor. And we can't control either of those things. They're the most important things. Other factors that are relevant but play a far smaller part are prolonged exposure to estrogens. So if you're on HRT for more than 5 years, you statistically increase your risk of getting breast cancer by a small amount. And lifestyle, we blame cigarettes and alcohol for everything. It's just kind of a form of punishment we give out. But cigarettes, actually, we don't have great evidence. They're going to cause your lung cancer and your heart attack before you get a chance to get breast cancer from it. So don't blame cigarettes for it. Alcohol, yes, there is an association with alcohol and the development of breast cancer. Not that strong. But one that is very significant is being overweight. Certainly increases your risk of developing breast cancer, because we know that in the peripheral fat in the body is where you actually make estrogen. So if you have more fat, you're more likely to make more estrogen, which can be a stimulus to development of breast cancer. So what's new in breast cancer? Well, I think the most exciting fact in the last 3 years is that less women need chemotherapy. You never hear about this in the media because it's a good news story. They only are interested in bad news. This is a good news story, and the reason is because of the scientific advances that have happened. And for over the last 2 decades, we've been trying to work out, have we a test that can tell you whether you would benefit from chemotherapy? So 17 years ago when I started, if we thought there was any benefit, for sure, patients and doctors would say, we'll give you chemotherapy. And we did lots of research on it. If you said to people, well, you have a 10% chance of improving your survival, would you take the chemotherapy? Everybody would. And we also found if it was something like a 1%, most people would still go for it. And there was a little bit of variation between 1 and 10%. If you said it was 20%, everyone would take it. So we were giving a chemotherapy to everyone who we thought that it might improve, because we were desperate to do anything to improve survival. But in the last number of years, a lot of work has gone on trying to get an accurate predictive test to say who will benefit from chemotherapy. And here's what they did. A group in America took the data from about 30 years of research, and they went back to trials that involved thousands of women. And that's one of the features of trials in breast cancer. There are usually thousands in each arm of the study. And they went and got the tissue, and they looked at the genetic aspects of the individual lady's tumour. And they came up with 21 genes that they thought were important. Now, it's interesting. When I teach a medical school class and I say, what do you think are the most important 2 genes? These are all medical students. They will tell you straight away, we know the answer. The first one is the estrogen receptor, and the second one is the Her2 receptor. Now that's as complex as I'm going to get tonight. There are 2 receptors that are important in breast cancer. But any medical student will tell you they're really important. They added in another bunch of receptors, all of some importance, but the most important, I think, to this day are the estrogen receptor and the Her2 receptor. And they made a test, and guess what? They got a license for it, and they started off charging 3,600 euros for this test. And they validated the test. It took 5-6 years doing it, showing that if you have these 2 receptors, they can tell whether you're going to do badly or not. And they went back and looked at data from thousands of women as to how long they survived based upon the treatment they got in these receptors. And they invented a system whereby they took your tissue, they measured the quantity of these receptors, and if you had a very poor outcome, you get a very high score. They made it between 0 and 100. And if you had a very low score, you were going to do really, really well. And then they went back and they proved it in studies showing that those women who had this low score did not need chemotherapy. And in fact, they've been marketing it for several years. We've had it in practice here in Ireland as standard of care for the last 3 years. It's an oncotype test. It's appropriate for about maybe 80% of people. It's valid to do it. And if you get a very low score, you don't need chemotherapy. If you have a high score, you will benefit from it. And we found in Beaumont Hospital, when we looked at our own data, we reduced the amount of chemotherapy given by 50%. An extraordinary benefit. So nowadays, people who are getting chemotherapy are those whom we know it's really, really beneficial. There still is a group in the middle, by the way, that we don't quite know the answer. So the numbers are, if you're less than 19, we know it's safe not to give chemotherapy. If it's sort of 19 up to 25, we're still uncertain. We're waiting for the results of other trials to come out. If it's more than 25, we say definitely you need chemotherapy. So I have a few slides here just to show you these things. The name of this test is the Oncotype breast cancer assay. And you know, there's interesting politics to all of this. This was designed in America. I think the owners, all 5 of them who were in the research lab on the east coast of America, I think they're living in the Bahamas now, sipping martinis. They no longer live in busy New York. But it's an American test. It used to be $3,600. And like everything in America, if you had the money, people bought it straight away and used the test. But then they were trying to sell it, and they came to Europe and they met Susan O'Reilly, who was head of the NCCP. And the only problem for the Oncotype company was that Susan O'Reilly is a medical oncologist who knew all about it. And she bargained them down and said, you know, we could get you evidence in this country that it's really worthwhile. And she got it for a very cost-effective price. And in fact, guess where they went next? Where's their next biggest mission in Europe? Well, they went to Britain, and the British just said, no, not invented here. We're not interested. Went to Holland. No, there's a really hot scientist in Holland who's got her own Oncotype. Oncotype Europe, I call it, right? There's another version. Like everything, they make their own. And then the real thing was when they got Angela Merkel persuaded with her population, these guys moved off to the Bahamas and never had to work again. So they made their deal in Ireland. They got the evidence from us, but it's a really good test. And the other, like everything in life, the Europeans have now designed their own one, and it's called MammaPrint. So it's another test that's very useful in helping us predict the effectiveness of chemotherapy. So significant advances about deciding who you give the treatment to. This is what it looks like. It's down, I think it's at less than €1,000 now is the current price for it. And this is what they do. They take the patient's tumour, and patients in Ireland, our tumour is actually sent off to the United States. They give a 14-day turnaround. They analyse the DNA profile, give you a report back, and it helps the patient make the decision. So that's the Oncotype, yes. So the other thing I wanted to just talk about today was the drugs that we are using are getting better. And this is a really exciting area. And if I want to show you, this is one cartoon and it will not get any more confusing, okay? So this is a breast cancer cell, it's a cartoon of it. And there are 2 important parts that we understand about the biology of a cancer cell. There's the estrogen receptor, which is here, and we have another receptor out here called Her2. I apologize for these confusing names, but you know, scientists in the lab, if they can't get their own initials on it, they just give you things you can't pronounce. So Her2 is one receptor and ER is the other one. This has been around since the 60s, and in fact a drug called tamoxifen, which many people know, has certainly been around since the 1960s, the most used drug, and it's been very effective. It basically links there and inhibits the growth of the tumour. It has been very effective. But what we do know is that 30% of women on tamoxifen eventually will relapse. And that's a subject that's been passionate to our group here in RCSI, and Professor Leonie Young leads up that group, where we take the tumours that no longer are responsive to tamoxifen. And we try and understand the biological pathway as to what actually happens. And what we have learned is we've got our favorite molecule, and for those of you that's interested, it's called SRC1. And that little molecule is in there, and as part of the development of resistance, that molecule SRC1 grows, and it makes the cell resistant to tamoxifen. And what we're trying to do is target how can we actually attack that molecule to stop. So when you become resistant to tamoxifen, we could actually target it. And the question that the woman wants to know is, when she's taken her tamoxifen tablet, is she developing resistance to it? So we're working on a diagnostic blood test that you could take, and we're trying to validate this now. We have one whereby our favorite molecule will, when you get resistance, the favorite molecule is produced, and that produces a compound in the serum that we can measure and safely say, you know what, you're getting into trouble, your tamoxifen won't work anymore. I think it would be incredibly useful, but we've had 10 years of work on it, getting that far to identify it. I think it will be a substantial help that people could monitor how they're doing on tamoxifen. So something else that's happened over the last number of years is that many patients, if there's any patients in the audience, will remember that usually we would say you need drugs for 5 years, tamoxifen or an aromatase inhibitor. They would be given for 5 years. But now, over the summer, we've had conclusive evidence in a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine that taking these tablets for 10 years is good for you. Now here's something exciting. You kind of think, well, that's great. You think the next group you'll say, okay, people are doing better from breast cancer, maybe you should be taking it for 15 years. Now, the answer is not to continuously take it for 15 years. So what happens is, we know that if you take tamoxifen or its equivalent for 5 years, you just dampen down and the cancer doesn't grow. If you take it for 10 years, you still dampen it down. Sounds good. You would say, well, why not just take it for 15 years? Well, what happens is, if you take it for 15 years, you dampen it down so much that the cell eventually learns how to beat the tamoxifen and develop a resistant pathway. That's what we've been studying in the lab. So if you keep just giving tamoxifen for 15 years, you force the growth of new resistant cells that you can't beat. So here's the next trial that's currently being designed at the moment. After 10 years, we're going to suggest you take tamoxifen for a month on and a month off. So you just dampen it down and see does that work. And that's where we're at now in long-term survivors. So lots of exciting things that we're looking for the results of. But what I think is really nice is where we used to focus on people just surviving the first 5 years, we're now studying groups that are surviving from 10 to 15 years, indicating that the outcome from breast cancer is improving, that we have a large cohort of survivors in that age range. This one here, the Her2 receptor, this has been known about since the 1970s, but we have to give credit to Dennis Slayman. He's a brilliant scientist who lives in San Francisco. He spends more time in Dublin, and I'm very suspicious about that. I think there might be another friend. He's here a lot. Every time you invite him, I'll be over straight away. But he was the scientist that actually identified Herceptin. Herceptin is the commercial name for the drug. The actual name is called trastuzumab. And you might say, what a weird name. Well, they give it this weird name, trastuzumab, because you can't say it. So you have to say Herceptin, it's much easier. So they're designing, the trade name is always like bang and smash and easy things to say. And they just throw down a whole load of consonants and you can't pronounce it when they're giving the new drug names. Because they're making drugs all the time and the names just get unpronounceable. So this one, Herceptin, works along this and it works really well. And I want to tell you one exciting fact. This is around for 10 years and we know it works and it's really, really good. And guess what? Like everything in the industry, we're just simple doctors. We don't understand the dynamics of industry, right? But when the company who makes Herceptin, guess what? The guy down the street, the other company says, well, give me that drug, let's break a molecule off and see if it's just as good, and we'll market our drug. And that's exactly what they do, okay? So GlaxoSmithKline came along, and they actually targeted, not the outside part, they targeted the inside part of the receptor. And they found, if you hit that with a sledgehammer, it works just as well as hitting that with a sledgehammer, and the cell disintegrates. So they had all these tests of giving Herceptin, hitting it on the outside, and giving this newer drug, hitting it on the inside, and they were competing and spending $30 million comparing one versus the other, okay? You might kind of say, God, it is that expensive. It's $30 million to do that sort of trial over a number of years. Guess what? Some smart person, John Crown tries to say he did it. But some smart person persuaded those two companies to come together and do a study where they'd give both the Herceptin and the drug that works on the inside and give it together. And guess what? 50% of women get a complete response. Obliterates the cancer completely. So if you give the two drugs, 50% of women with this type of breast cancer, you obliterate the tumor completely. Isn't that amazing? Now, that's only out a few years. I think it's wonderful. So we know that, unfortunately, it's only 20% of tumors have that receptor. But if you do, nowadays, giving two drugs, 50% complete response. That means I am not needed as a surgeon. That is my ambition, not to actually have to operate for breast cancer. We're not there yet. I have a couple of years to retirement. I don't think I'll be unemployed yet. But what's next? Well, maybe we could think of 3 drugs. I don't know, but there's going to be something innovative, or they might get something down this pathway here to target, and that's what they're working on right now. There's a whole series of areas along this pathway that you can block. And for sure, it's about picking the right combination that will get this response rate with the 2 drugs up here. Add in something down here, you might get up to 75, 80%. I think it's going to be an exciting year over the next few years that we'll actually be able to target breast cancer by understanding the biology and giving these drugs. These drugs here, the Herceptin, they don't make you lose your hair. They're relatively non-toxic. The bad news is that they found when you give these in addition to chemotherapy, they're more effective. So we're still giving chemotherapy, which makes you lose your hair. But these drugs are very, very effective. This is $1 billion industry right now. They're trying to work it out as fast as they can. How can we actually look inside the cell, target these cells, and obliterate them completely? I think it's going to happen. I can't predict the exact amount of time, but it's a very exciting era. I'm going to finish. I just want to show you one more slide, if I may. This is just to share with you something that we're particularly excited about as surgeons, because 17 years ago when I started, the operation we would do for lymph nodes under the arm would be to take out all the lymph nodes. And that was standard. And then we developed a more selective approach where we just take out the first node, and it's called a sentinel node. And I'm sorry to put up this picture, but it's the one intraoperative picture. This is what makes us happy in our working day. When you see a nice little blue node like that, that's what we take out and we analyze to see if there's any cancer cells in it. But it's that pretty blue picture. It's kind of like almost turquoise. Now, what we do have to warn our patients is, they're always picked up, if it's a day ward case, the husbands always come in early, actually. That's what I find. And we always have to warn them and say, look, if you come in at 6 o'clock, your wife may look like a blue smurf. But it will be gone by 8 o'clock. Please take her home. So they have this beautiful blue glow as this dye is just washing through them. And then, of course, I remember I was a trainee fellow in New York, and we were introducing this, and I used to get all these calls at night. My urine has gone funny colour, and as it washed out, it was there. Irish people have never wrong to tell you something like that. You're wonderful. It's so much nicer to work in this country. We don't get those phone calls. So that's the advance that we've had in surgery.
I found them very good. They're very informative, and I found it was very easy for people who weren't connected to the kind of medical end of the jargon. It was very easy and very, very well spoken. So drugs are always changing. The length of drugs that are being used, they change. The different treatments are changing. I hadn't heard of the new machine where they put the radiology into the patient on the table. Like, that's really big development, you know.